We remember that the 1st of November carries. Do we? The 1st of November is special to some people, maybe to all of us. Well, we can say hooray to NESI. It's 10 years post-privatization. Can we give it a round of applause? It hasn't been an easy ride. That was why we said the journey so far, the opportunities and prospects. Today makes the 10th year anniversary for NESI. Let's give it up for them again. Congratulations. Now, we're going to start today's session, and I would appreciate my moderator to understand the moment the lady in red stands up, it means time is getting close to, so that we won't do what happened yesterday. We'll have our time properly arranged, and then we'll have our tea break. We'll come back and have the two sessions together, back to back, so that we'll go have lunch, and we go to our various, possibly hotels, offices, or wherever we would like to be before we go for the big event, which is the gala night. We have packaged so much for us because 3 days together, we want to bring every hour we have spent together to fraternize, to talk to ourselves, to eat, to even dance if possible. I know the gala night carries a lot of things, and I know my organizers have put in effort to see that the gala night covers all, possibly the stress we had all the 3 days. So please, we're not going to miss the gala night. We're going to do everything in a jiffy to finish on time and come back for it. So for a start, we're talking of technical session F, NESI Regulatory Ecosystem Electricity Amendment Act 2023. And it's going to talk about a review and implications for consumers, states, and market players. We have a moderator that would take us through this session. And sir, like I said, the moment I'm on my feet, it means time is running out for the session. And I think we would have to keep to timing. So we have Mr. Wale Shoni Bare. He is the African Development Bank, whether it's the manager or what, no title to that. But all the same, sir, you're welcome. And I would like to have you take over from me at the moment. Okay, I was looking at a different person. Can you imagine? Anyway, thank you. Welcome, sir. I don't know, maybe you go this way. It's a pleasure meeting you. Good morning, sir. And thank you. Here you are.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for this very interesting session. So we have a panel of, we have a distinguished panel this morning. You know, I'm sure you will find it very interesting. These are veterans of the energy sector in Nigeria. And if you ask them to take their shirts off, each one will have lashes, marks on their back to show, you know, what they've experienced in this market. But we were talking this morning that, you know, this whole thing about whether or not privatization has been a success or failure, one thing we cannot deny is the amount of capacity that has been built in this market. You know, many of us have made our careers in the energy sector as a result of the issues we've had to take on over the past 10 years. So we can't deny that, and in the long run, that will benefit the sector. So without further ado, I would like to invite my distinguished panelists to come up on stage here and take their seats. So I will call out the names. We have Mr. George Itome, who is a very experienced legal practitioner. Thank you very much, sir. So if you take on that next seat over there. Then we have Barrister Wolemi Eson. Oh, careful. Yeah, so please, Wolemi, next to George. And then we also have Honorable Commissioner Olalere Odushete, former Honorable Commissioner, Lagos State. Olalere Odushete, please come and take a seat there. Thank you. And then we have Peter Trisige, who's joining online from South Africa. He's a professor at the University of Cape Town, but we thought we should also have the benefit of international experience and what has been achieved. So I hope we have that connection to Peter. And then, last but not least, we have Dr. Sam Amadi, who needs no introduction. He will take us through a presentation. Please give him a round of applause. Can I ask you to sit in the middle? I'll take the seat at the far end. Yeah. No, it's fine. I like to be able to see everybody. So the run of play this morning is we're going to have a setting the scene presentation by Dr. Sam Amadi, and then after that we'll go into questions. So thank you so much. Maybe I'll now hand over to Dr. Amadi. I think he has some slides. I don't know if he's going to be using the slides or not, but whoever is projecting should please project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, moderator. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and I guess it's still morning, yep, to be sure. Okay, yeah. Today I'll just quick and brief, maybe overview, but not as former chairman of NEC. It's over 10 years, I guess, or up to 10 years. So I'm here as Sam Amadi, at most director of Abuja School of Social and Political Thought. I mean, so all this former. It's a long time. So I will present as if it's me. It looks at the slide, it's not but again, let me start by saying that, well, even my slide doesn't have fancy, there's no apple, unlike Owen, who has an apple yesterday, and some beautiful slides. My slides are basically talking points. I don't normally like slides. I like to, but because workshops require slides, so I have one. First, half empty, half full. We should start from there. So I think 10 years after, we can point to a couple of things that have been right and a couple of things that have been wrong. For the things that are wrong, I think probably we'll dwell more on that for purpose of change. But nevertheless, the things that are right. My slides started, since it's not open, I can just start with the notion of where we are, current status. Evidence speaks for itself. One of the areas that we have seen improvement from data by NEC is, maybe I should on a computer since they don't have the slide, is the optimization. This sector has been able to optimize resources more than we had in the past, meaning that if we have only availability of 5 megawatts or 5,000, okay, sure, we're here. Okay then, okay. Thank you. I hope I'm okay. Okay, so I'll just run through. I mean, this basic current status where we are now. So everybody thinks there is a crisis. If you have, let's say, 4,000 megawatts for 200 plus, 213, some say estimated Nigerians, then you really have a problem. Many leaders think the economy, poor performance. They look at everything and say, maybe we have performed poorly. Okay. This is what we know already. What causes this problem? Why do we go into a reform? I won't dwell much. This is what you know, but I guess the context is important. This is also what we know. We are now, from 2005, when the Act was enacted, and from 2013, when we privatized, we're now in post-reform, post-liberation and privatization phase. How far have we gone? And of course, this is what we know. This is the elements of the power sector reform, vertical unbundling, horizontal unbundling, liberalizing the market, commercialization, privatization, regulation, and so on. And then we will hope to get to competitive electricity market. NEC issued a 2022 report and talked about efforts towards and how close we are with the CPs. Interestingly, I think the CPs has not moved faster than 2015 when we left. We are still dealing with most of those unfinished business. We are still on them. That's a story I will elaborate. Okay, this is what we've done, which everybody knows. But this is actually where. Now, my view since I left NEC is the same. That maybe we privatize too early. Maybe we privatize in a hurry. Mark my word, maybe. So I want to say it as a conversation. I won't be final on anything. And why do I say too early? The NEP, the National Electric Power Policy, which is the policy framework, talks around proper corporatization, commercialization, leading to privatization. So there was the notion, rightly, that there's a stage, there are stages that needs to lead to the other in some kind of organic way. My view, right from day one, as chairman, was that we skipped critical stages. And that skipping results in deficiencies that the privatized market struggles with up to today. I remember that we did the first audit of the account. We didn't have an audit account until we did the one to precede privatization. Clarity on customer numbers were not properly established. We were talking about using geo-mapping to get to clarity. I'm not sure that has even been done. So SCADA, not available. NEC reports, efforts being done to see whether we can get there quicker. So the issue is that some of the assumptions may not have worked. So the assumptions around privatization were too simplistic in my view, and then it's not our fault. It was part of the orthodoxy that was dominant then. We've seen in Morocco, in Egypt, Tunisia, some other markets, a different process. Even today, they are still planning to enter into fully privatized commercial markets. Okay. Now, have things improved, and by how much? Like I said. Okay, so this is evidence number one, evidence-based advocacy. So by the time we left in 2015, it was about 6,401 megawatts, okay? In 2022, 4,000. This is from NEC's report. Average generation pre-privatization, 4.117 as at 2006. Average today is 3,892. Now look at capacity utilization. You can see ramping up, meaning that what they had, they could use better than we are using. So from 55% to 95%. About 2,588,671 meters installed since 2013, according to NEC. Metering ratio as at 2013, before we handed over, we did a metering inquiry. It was around 40%. Today, it's still at 42.22%. So you can see some of the evidence too. Now, installed capacity, you can see what it was in 2015, what it is now. I'm using 2015 because I left in 2015, so that's the data, my own endpoint. Daily generation, you can see. SCADA system still in operation. Before we left, we were talking about ISO separation, separating the system operator, independent system operator, TSP, is still ongoing. We've seen significant progress in maximum demand customer metering. That has been very phenomenal. The discourse have done well there, but we see that the CPs for the competitive market are largely uncompleted. So, for me, why have we not done so well? Let's not say we've done badly. Some people will say half full, half empty. So why have we not done so well? Some people say rigged process, and I don't think it's true. I think we had a transparent privatization process, in my view, as much as possible. But I would rather say the underlying issues. So some point to we are so dogmatic in privatizing, and I want to be clear on that. If you look at performance in the market, look at Yola, for example, look at ECO, maybe we should have privatized some, maybe allow some to catch up. Because one interesting factor, when the investors handed over Yola started doing better. When it was interesting, I have not investigated why, but Yola started doing better with Ministry of Power than with private investor. Because we used to pay Yola from market funds, but then they were now posting more revenue. So I talk about adaptation and contextualization. We are so, when you are not pragmatic, you will not look at the context of privatization in terms of what you need to do. And then we'll talk about weak institutions. Up to today, we're talking about it. So should we have built institution before market, or will market build institution? If you look at the Chinese co-evolution theory, how China developed economically, they use bad institutions to create market and create development. And then those phenomenon corrected those institutions. But we are too Puritan, too ideological. You want to get the right institutions, then you fail. But use bad institutions, improve them, they create the phenomenon that now reforms them. So now they are more, by 1978, China didn't look like a market economy. By today, they look more like a market economy, co-evolution. So maybe that's product we didn't do very well. And of course, the private sector, by providing finance, will not correct inefficiency without effective regulation and aligning the microeconomy. That's critical. And I will share some experience during the conversation on this. So for me, I see two problems. One is a diagnosis, what I call a modeling problem. You don't properly diagnose. Clinical doctors, what we call clinical diagnosis. So if somebody has headache, it could be malaria, it could be something else. But if you quickly zero in on malaria, then you administer a cure worse than the disease. It complicates it. So modeling is critical. For engineers, that's easy for them to understand. So if you don't model, even mathematicians, scientists, if you don't model properly, I don't think we model properly, we simply assume that once you privatize, and I can understand that mindset. Why are we going to deal with Nigerian bureaucrats? Nigerian governance reform is terrible. We don't get it right. I recall when we are in government then, and the minister then proposed to put 5 billion in AFAM, and I told Mr. President, Mr. President, this is a regulated licensed entity. You can't put money without prudence and efficiency check. You have to convince the regulator that this is what you want to, because that money has to be recovered through tariff. You just say 5 billion. What's the prudence analysis? What's the relevance that investment will create more value? So the thinking of old school, this is government putting money. Okay, the parent agree with me, but when I left, they still put that money, and it was wasted. So the point is that you are mapping something that you've not really done what you ought to do. So, okay. So I think that's the point I want to make here is that we privatize most countries, Chile, UK, that we borrowed mostly from, even India, privatized with a certain degree of capacity. It was not inefficiently used. So you had a generating capacity, but you needed efficiency of the market. But we are privatized when the private sector will create that capacity first and optimize efficiency. So two different propositions. The other person has, it's just like you have a lot of estates and nobody's managing them well. You hire a private sector estate manager. Their job is easier to make sure it's efficiently run. But you now say we want to create housing stock, and we want the estate people to go and get the funds, develop the land, acquire the land lease, and build those houses and run them. Two different propositions. And I think it's important to have that, bear that in mind. And as I round up, okay. So I've talked about this mostly, wrong directions, inefficient and corrupt project management. And I said this, for example, if Nigeria public sector was efficient and NIPP were able to cash out their 10,000 megawatts within that space from 2005 to 2010, 5,000 is on, to 2015, 10,000. You'll be dealing with potential a real market with more than 15 or 20,000 megawatts market that makes sense. So our project management failures are also very important. Of course, I won't talk about number 3, compromise people. Okay, let's move on. I don't want to cause. Okay, now, I want to be less controversial. Now, how much has the Electricity Act changed the game? And I want to just quickly. Clearly, there's no more second guessing that states can now have the legal legislative authority to play the game. But let me make this point. I've never believed that the problem of this sector is that the states can't play in this market. That's not the real problem. I believe that they can. And Lagos State under Fashola worked very well. I was always in every of their distinct events. They had the license to do a lot of things, and they did well within the context of Nigeria State. Of course, Ibom had their own, Akwa Ibom has. Rivers had a very large capacity generating plant, which they sold to a private sector, and it's now a matter of serious legal inquiry, green paper, yellow paper, blue paper, and white paper. So the problem is not necessarily that the states can't play. I remember at the FEC when Amechi was saying, then the president shouting that why can he has power in River State and he can't use it for River State and go to the grid. I said, okay, if you have power, you can use it. There are structure, embedded generation structures, there are engagement to discourse that can make you, those power can be used to serve your people. So most of these issues about states are tied up and not the real problem, but let's accept it. The Act now aligns the NESI to the Constitutional Amendment, yes. NEC has introduced some regulations, Eligible Customer Electricity Franchising Act that can enable better transactions in the market. And of course, there may be plans to unbundle distribution into wire business and retail. The key features also include that the laws in the electricity power sector has been consolidated. We now have NEMPSR, which I fought against and which I still believe was a bad idea, still there. We now have the hydropower still there. We have NAPTIP. All of them are now unified in one central electoral act. In the past, those were executive agencies created by the ministry and then later normalized by law. So now it's good that we have them. We now have a requirement of comprehensive resource planning through the NEPSI. It provides for consolidated power framework. And important, it puts NEC obligation to now get to renewable energy. There's now a clarity on policy regarding renewable energy and the requirement of licensing, even fiscal policy to support renewable energy. So those are some of the very good aspects of this act. And then states can now engage, like I said before. We did the independent electricity distribution network, independent transmission network, and all that. But this law has now embedded it in the act and given it, more legal footing. So that's important. And of course, I talked about tax incentives for expansion of renewable energy and other incentives for renewable energy. Okay. Now, let me be criticized or more critical about the act. The positives, like I said, comprehensive framework of regulation of the grid. It has updated the EPSR to align with market transactions. States can now play. It incorporates new governance institutions. It has provided for a robust concentrated power framework that includes renewable, okay? Then there's a clarity on the roadmap to competitive markets, in my view. So these are the positives. Now, for the negatives, I think it has created an unwieldy governance institution for the market, very, very unwieldy, with the possibility for conflicts in roles and inefficiency. I think the law is too verbose and creates institutions that can lead to weakening the regulatory power of NEC. Especially for me, it was the so-called National Power Policy Coordination Council. I don't think it's necessary. You see, there should be clarity. That's production, that's regulation, that's policy. This idea of getting over on the stakeholder, we talk a lot about stakeholder, local government, state, national, they meet from time to time. To do what? The president, chief executive, to his minister, lays out policy, clarity. It doesn't matter where you shop it from. The regulator implements with technical direction, and operators deliver. And the market has built-in peer review mechanisms all the governance institutions that are market industry-based. So I think it's I didn't like that. I think there's lack of clarity regarding relationship between state and federal regulatory agencies. States are now doing their own laws. Last week I was the governor of Edo State, a very smart guy. He gave me the law of the state, asked me to review. I discovered that the way they are creating their state regulatory entities and the lack of clarity in that act, the act says that you can do your own business once you have a regulatory agency, and then you're not using federal facility for transport, maybe TCN. That's going to be a problem because we still have a federalized TCN, and the notion of states copying out of that federalized rule is not good. I would have suggested, what I have been suggesting is that we have, like US, we have a FAC, a federal regulator on transmission and wire business, and then states can regulate customer care, like they have the PSCs. That means how each state can use those rules by NEC to adapt to their state and enforce. But one of the problems we have with this market is that there's no way NEC can enforce a customer breach effectively in Owo, in Owerri, in Sokoto. That's why we set up the zonal offices. It didn't work very well, and NEC has shut it down. So why can't states take over fully customer care using those regulations that NEC make? Secondly, states can engage in distribution with the IEDN, but again, the lack of clarity as to how federal and state regulations can work together will be a problem for this market. And I think there's too much exhortation. Oh, we should do this, do that are not legally binding. It's really a good document, but maybe too many interests, putting in too many things, and incoherence and lack of clarity becomes a problem. Okay, so I just quickly propose 3. I'm a supporter of presidential task force. Many people don't like it. And it's very simple. Yesterday I was talking about government. People say government, too much government. You have to be clear as to what kind of government you want. I want government to be involved at a level, not of bureaucracy, but a level of efficiency and coordination. Many of our problems in the power sector are slippages that suggest weak on-the-ground management. A presidential task force properly constituted can track those short-term improvements, but then you await the long-term that requires review of the structure. I think so. I think that people are saying, oh, these courses are not performed, dismantle them. I think we should not disrupt the market. We should have a regulator who will be much more active in incentivizing discourse to higher level of performance. Once you have privatized and reformed, the big work is using incentive structure to improve performance. Using sanctions, so we should resist the attempt to try to resort to disruptions. It may look good, but that's not the way. Regulation can actually create a sector in a non-disruptive way, and in a way that market itself will be happy because it's part of a peer-reviewed structure that will happen. I think maybe we should think around unbundling distribution. This is maybe a long-term shot. But why this is important that all the possible virtues of privatization will fail without competition. The real thing that drives efficiency is actually competition. And that's why what regulation does is to imitate, to create a competitive environment through regulation. So if we have unbundled retail, for example, then the pressure, people talk about MTN, Glo, there was no magic. It's a sector that is easy to have competition. You get your broad spectrum license, you roll out your services, then you put pressure on the incumbent to improve. Otherwise, exit, customers move, and then the pressure is there. So if you have a market that doesn't have that competitive character, they have to have very strong regulation. Some people will think it is too hard on market to get private entities to perform optimally. So I think, but the right idea is, this is subject to large quantities of supply. You must have plural suppliers so that everybody can buy from different persons and they take advantage. I don't know when we'll get there, but we should be striving to get there. And then finally, I think when I say bring back smart state, I remember when we were in office then, and we had a meeting with Tony Blair, with Okonjo Iweala, and he made a good a point I like. He says, you can outsource or insource everything, but you can't insource government. You can't bring British government to Nigeria. And you can't outsource the work of Nigerian government because it don't like government. I think this sector needs co-evolution. The Nigerian state has to be more smarter, business-minded, entrepreneurial to align with the private sector work. We cannot have the government state running the way it's running and expect that the private sector will transform the market. It's not true. Look at all examples. I'd like to give you, to end with one story. When we are doing, after privatization, I sensed that the problem we're going to have was going to be with managing these guys to be efficient. So what we did was, instead of struggling with, I tell people I didn't do privatization because I did fit and proper regulation. I now went back and said, let's develop a fit and proper regulation after the banking sector. And we did that. And we required independent directors for each of the entities. So when TCN was, the board of TCN was constituted, I went to him and said, the board requires an independent director. When we were at NEC as chairman, as the commission, we said, if we say NEC will appoint, they will say we are looking for power grab. So I was in support of NEC appointing after like the central bank. My colleagues wisely say no. So we didn't keep, we left this. I went to him, I said, we have to appoint a independent director to have be the eye to be able to second guess the operations of the market. He agreed. Sent to Jonathan. Of course, Jonathan always agreed with us, a good president in my view. Jonathan says, yes, Sam to appoint. I saw the paper, Sam to appoint. So my friend took it and then appointed a former governor, his friend, into that board. Now, what I'm trying to do this story out is that this is a provision for oversight of an independent person. It became a provision to put a former governor. So even if independent directorship brings out value, in that stance, will it bring value? That is why we need to have a smart state. We need to have government itself, reform itself to align with the reform that the private sector will do. Otherwise, we will not have private sector problems. So I think that's, okay, I think we should not rely blindly on the Electricity Act to improve electricity supply by trusting the state government to get it right. I've been telling state governors, come as a region, you may have some success. All these states make it, as at the last count, over 10 states, Enugu has done, they sent me their copy to review. Akwa Ibom is doing, Rivers, I'm doing for some work for some of the states in Niger Delta. Edo has given their own. None of these, I keep telling them, they can't deliver. They can't, you need scale, you need regional scale to even, so with the existing discourse, they can come together and drive states' investment and regulations to manage at the level of region. Otherwise, the way they're going state by state, they will disrupt the market and we'll get back to a worse state than we are right now. So conclusion, the reform is a story of success to the extent that some of the institutionalized and structured inefficiencies of the NESI have been overcome. We now have a more accountable market that will better respond to good regulations and policies. But we have not yet achieved the desired efficiency because of incoherence of policy and regulatory landscape, including wrong assumptions about the utility of free market and the failure to have orderly transition to private electricity market. The rushed professional results in capacity gap. We have to be more pragmatic and allow time for good policies to produce good results. I want to end on that note that no matter what we do, there's a time lag. We shouldn't assume that somehow we will get results in 1 year, 2 years. So allow policies to mature so you learn where they have failed and tweak it, not overt displacement or replacement of policies. Thank you very much.
Okay, hope you can hear me. Thank you very much, Dr. Sam Amadi, for that very comprehensive overview of the background to the sector and you know, the key features of the Electricity Act. You know, if I can paraphrase what you said very briefly, I mean, what we're saying is that it's been a story of mixed success and failure. You know, there are some things that have improved, some things that have not quite improved. In some areas, the successes have been marginal. it was interesting that you pointed out the case of Yola, where you were saying after the government took back the asset, performance actually improved a bit. But we've also seen, the private sector also make considerable improvements. Eco Disco, Abuja, these are, success stories. So it's been a mixture. And what you were saying was that, look, maybe they shouldn't have tried to do the privatization all at once. They could have taken it in stages, and then, create the institutions. And through the process, the institutions can actually improve the service, the performance. So I think that's a very useful point. And the other thing that you were saying, in terms of what the Act has done, it's actually consolidated pieces of different legislation into one kind of omnibus, act that takes account of things, NAPTIM, what's happening with hydropower. It's produced a renewable energy obligation. And so all of those things are good because now instead of having legislation, spread all over the place, you've consolidated. But there are some potential weaknesses that we have to be aware of because there's now so many institutions. The coordination may be a problem, maybe an issue. And then it's a bit heavy in terms of its requirement and it's mandating so many different things. And you're a fan of a task force, with presidential task force. One thing, and this is my opinion as well, that we can give Jonathan's administration some credit for the way the presidential task force actually was implemented and the direction it gave to the industry for that brief period. So I'm with you on that very strong coordination from government, the idea that, you cannot outsource government. You need smart states, to procure smartly. So I think that's also a very, very useful point to take away. But the idea of creating competition and having, the franchising model, retail, and being able to have competition to drive performance in order to replicate the success of telecoms. I think that's also a very useful lesson to take from what you said. So I think, the act in itself, like you said, is not necessarily going to change the sector, but it's how we implement, because even before the act, the states were able to do a few things. We saw in Lagos, we saw with Ibom Power, etc. So where the states wanted to do things, they're able to do things. But anyway, the act is now, being signed off and approved, and no point looking back. We have to implement the act. So let me start with, Larry Ogunshiote, former Honorable Commissioner for Lagos State, because I know for a fact that he was one of the key drivers of the reforms and this act coming into being, because Lagos State was actually very quick off the block in saying, look, we need to have more flexibility to be able to do things. So my question to you is, what is it in this act that's going to be different from the powers that the state had before? And in driving for the changes that have been introduced, what were you hoping to achieve? What gaps were you trying to fill? And do you think the act, as it is now, is going to enable that process to allow us to see some measurable improvement at state level?
Well, thank you. The act in and of itself does not do anything because it's just something that's written down on a piece of paper. It's the follow-through and the actions of the people who leverage what the act has done that's going to determine what will change. Now let me say this. When we started this process about 4 years ago, it was not about control. It wasn't that the states were interested in taking control of the sector. It was really just about achieving universal access to electricity, and the fact that 10 years, almost 10 years now, not much has changed in the sector. And when I say not much has changed, I'm not trying to downplay the successes that the sector has recorded, but on a per capita basis on the delivery of electricity, nothing has changed. We have not improved. And the question that the governor asked me at that time was why? Because on the campaign trail, two things came up from Lagosians. One was traffic. That was the number one. And the number two, surprisingly, was electricity availability. And so he said, we've been talking about this thing for the past 12 years, at least since I've known you. What's the answer? What can we change about it? And I said, we need to make the sector more attractive to investors. But we cannot do that under the current dispensation, right? We can only do that if we go back and change what the Constitution changed in 1999, which was to take away the ability of the states to make laws within their own states for the power sector. And I said, we're not just going to do that by itself. We're also going to try and understand exactly what the gaps in the sector are, because it's not enough to talk about it and say, oh no, we've got to improve it, like some people are saying. You have to be clear about that roadmap. And the first thing we did was to say, let's plan a capacity expansion plan. Let's come up with one. We called it an IRP. And where that starts from is from the demand. What exactly is the power need of Lagosians? And that's where we started. We sat down with the DISCOs, Eko and Ikeja. We worked with EGNI, the Transmission Company of Nigeria, and many other stakeholders. We sent out consultation papers. At the time, we came up with a demand forecast from the DISCOs, working with them. Here's what the demand is. Here's what the demand is projected to grow to over the next 20 years. Here's the infrastructure that we currently have in place. And here's the infrastructure gap. What's the infrastructure that we need to put in place to be able to create this expansion program? And that's what we did. And the infrastructure was not just distribution infrastructure, it was transmission infrastructure, generation infrastructure, and also fuel supply infrastructure, and also different technologies. And we were deliberate because the answer was, we're trying to create a roadmap. We're not just trying to come and say, okay, we're here, we're taking over. No. Taking over doesn't do anything for anybody if it does not improve the service. After we were done with that, the question was now, how can we incentivize investment? Well, we already have the investment roadmap. The question now is, what are the things that investors want us to do? They want us to ensure that there's sanctity of contracting, and where we decide that we want to take out contracting, they want a transparency in the system. And the transparency in the system is really by putting a market operator and a system operator in place where everybody could see where the power was flowing to, and everybody could understand how the settlement could happen. For us to do that, we had to create a separate market in Lagos. For us to be able to create a separate market in Lagos, we need to create a separate legislation for a different market in Lagos. Now, Lagos is not the same as every state in Nigeria, and I don't expect that every state in Nigeria will be able to do exactly what Lagos would do. However, we can create a template that every state can tweak. Now, the intention, again, is not that Lagos State will always stand alone. What we want to do is to create a center of excellence in Lagos that can then expand. Because if we expand from Lagos to then take the entire region, if they like what we're doing, we can work together on the legislation to get that done. We can eventually create a single market in Nigeria that works. Not one that's not a market where there's no trading of electricity in Nigeria today. There simply isn't any. We can say there's a market, there's no market. There's no long-term market beyond the PPAs that we've signed, and there are very many power stations in Nigeria today that are shut down. They're owned by the federal government and they do no trading at all. But every year, they get a budget to spend. The same thing with the Transmission Company of Nigeria. When you look at the investment that they make, you then ask yourself, are these actually commercial investments or are they political investments? What we want to do is to take as much as possible politics out of the investment decision making. Because why would you have more infrastructure, transmission infrastructure in Katsina than you would have in Kano? Just to use an example that everybody's aware of. Kano is where the market is in that region, yet Katsina is where the investment is being made. Why? Is there a coincidence of leadership from Katsina that's driving or influencing those decisions? Maybe there is. And that's what we said we cannot change if we leave regulation and legislation at the federal level, because nothing will change. The influences will still happen. If Lagos demands investment, if Lagos demands power, Lagos is not going to continue to survive on an allocation of a percentage of the availability from the grid that we have no input in directing. So those were the things that drove the desire to have a devolution at the center. And by and large, we discussed this as much as possible with a lot of people, including at the Nigerian Governors Forum. Now, the Governors Forum made a presentation at the Senate hearing of the reform review, or when they started to do the reform of the bill and they had their public hearings. The Governors Forum made a statement at that point to say, listen, this is why the states are not happy, and this is what the states want to see in this new electricity act that you're looking to approve. And that's where that came from. It was not from a desire to have a conflict. Now, the other thing that I need to make clear, the law follows what the Constitution states. So in trying to understand what the law intends, we can look at the Constitution. The Constitution is clear and unambiguous about the roles of the state houses of assembly and the role of the National Assembly. National Assembly is to make laws, and it states it clearly regarding generation and transmission. It's there, generation and transmission. It deliberately excludes the markets from it. So there's no confusion at all. All that Act does, in my opinion, and I've been guided by many lawyers on this, is it makes it clear that the states are to make laws, and it states in that law that nothing in that law shall affect the rights of the states in making laws for their own state markets. It also then says to the federal agencies that are created and regulated that at such a time as the state makes it clear that they're ready to administer their market, you will have a transition program to transit the responsibilities and the licenses to those state regulatory agencies. Everything else in the law is just, in my opinion, legalese. It is clear that we're aligned with the Constitution that says the states will make laws regards to their markets, in effect. And there are other lines to the Act, and there are many pages because Acts lawyers like to have voluminous documents to cover many bases. But really, that's what that Act does. We looked at it, we were sure that it had done that, and we went ahead. Lagos currently has an off-grid policy action plan that is published. Lagos has an electricity policy that is published that makes it clear the intention of the states to ensure universal access to electricity. And universal access for us is really electricity in the quantity you want it and the quality that you want it when you want it, rather than just whenever it's available on the grid. Is to build a grid that's going to deliver that, and to build it in a systematic way, and also to create assurances of the transparency of the cash flows that is necessary to attract investment into that sector.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I think that was very clear. So what we're saying is, look, the Act itself, of itself, is not going to change very much, but it's having, the right intention. And from what Lagos State did, I mean, you guys saw that there was a gap in terms of the allocation of resources. How are those resources being allocated? Is it efficient? Is it political? I like what you said about commercial versus political decision making. And and you guys in Lagos went ahead and you did your planning. You looked at the demand. You looked at where that power was going to be needed. Your integrated resource planning, the energy mix that you are going to require. And then, from your point of view, that act just provides clarity, because before, you may remember when we had a conversation at the time and you said you were doing this, your energy policy. My first question was, actually, does the state have the right to introduce its own policy, its own regulation? And so for me, I've been very pleased at the way things have evolved. Now that we have the clarity to say, look, state, there's no debate anymore, and it's following the Constitution. So I think that's really useful. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, okay, having provided that clarity, how is the market going to react? The state can take it up to a point. You're creating opportunities for the private sector to now come in and take advantage. This is where I want to go to Mr. Itomi, given your own experience of being an operator or close to an operator in this market. How do you see the playing field now?
Can I get
No, it's working. The light is on. No?
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, thank you.
Yeah, how
All
do
right,
you
thank
see
you.
the playing field now? Has it given you are you gingered up, as they say, to invest in this sector? Is it enough, or is there more that needs to be done from
Well,
your experience?
let me start by congratulating every one of us here. NESI is 10. Let me say something else. And I have practiced law for 46 years, and I've been mainly in the business law arena. And I have gone through the experience of the banking revolution, telecoms, the limited successes with aviation. And I am one strong proponent for infusing private sector discipline into businesses, generally speaking. So for me, for the electricity, and then the other point I'll also make is that the importance of opening up all these businesses is that it democratizes knowledge in those areas. I still recall when the banking industry was remember it was 3 major banks and then you had those 2 merchant banks. I still recall when the government wanted to enforce a policy to Nigerianize banking at that time. Some of those merchant banks actually had Nigerian employees who said, oh, it was too early, it was too quick, Nigerians were not ready. But they ignored that, pushed, and I still recall Banigo was taken from Chase to IMB, and that became what you might call the factory, where they produced what became the many managing directors we had in the Nigerian banking sector. What I'm saying here is that Nigerians stood up to the challenge that it presented. And the story is different today. Now, this is not to say the banking revolution didn't have its own hiccups. There were. And each time it was tinkered with. We had the banking and financial, remember those tribunals where they tried fraudulent guys, they revoked licenses, they brought in new players, but they never derailed. So it's important we learn from those things. Today, Nigerian banks are perhaps leading the African charge. And we're all proud that if you go to, in fact, if you know about banking services, Nigerian banking services is actually superior to what you have from American banks or the UK banks. I can tell you that. Let's look at telecoms. We celebrate the success of the telecom. In fact, I was the first lawyer to MTN. And I still recall when we went, sorry, I'm a student of history. That's why I'm saying all of these. I'll come back to electricity. I still recall in their offices when they were planning the rollout. At that time, nobody wanted to hear competition. Nobody wanted to hear competition. And MTN said, okay, they will come out with 1 million lines over 5 years, 200,000 per year. They wanted cautious. And I told them, guys, 200,000 will not leave Ikeja. And all that. Ramp up. They came with 1 million and their system jammed. But fast forward, today, even though MTN is technically a South African company, just go to the offices and see who's manning them and all that. Again, the Nigerian spirit, we rose up to the challenge. And the big difference with telecoms and power is that had telecoms sought, the investors sought to reform NITEL, the story would have been different. The luck we had was that the GSM technology had come, they sidestepped NITEL, and they rolled out on green fields. So if there was rapid results, that's why. So at times we shouldn't be too hard on ourselves in the electricity sector. The electricity sector, unfortunately, it was a behemoth. There's not much you can do. You have to work within what you have. So 10 years on, have we succeeded? The answer is, I wouldn't say yes, I wouldn't say no. I'll follow what Sam Amadi said. But there have been lessons and experiences learned that should not be thrown away. And the next challenge for us as Nigerians is that we have to challenge the geniuses in us. Look at the hall, it's full of Nigerians. When we took over Eco Disco, there were no white guys there. The same people we met have turned Eco into what it is today, even within the harsh environment in which we're working. So the genius is there in us. And that's why I prefer for this to be a conversation, because we're pulling all from our experiences and how do we get things done. So would the new Electricity Act make a difference? I believe it will, but I also share Engineer Dushode's point that the laws don't necessarily produce the results. It's the humans that operate the law. But if it gives comfort that states can now come into the field, okay, go ahead and do it. And so many state governments have called to say, what should we do, what should we do? I'm beginning to see like a rabbit race going on. I don't know how many states can truly get the job done, because the investments required in the power sector is in the billions of dollars, and it's not in Nigeria. So you need to create the enabling environment to attract those investments. So the way you create your structure, your sanctity for contracts, your ability to give assurances. You're not going to expropriate assets of those who have gone forward. How do you do your enforcement? I was here yesterday and I saw the degree of disco bashing that was going on. And I just said to myself, I think we're missing something here. And all that. That's not the spirit. Because if we go back into the blame game era, there's enough to go around the room, nothing will happen. I suggest that we look at what Lagos State is doing, because long before this Electricity Act came about, we as Ikeja and Eko were actually engaging Lagos State government. When Lagos State government was going to do its IEDN, Governor Fashion actually called us. And basically, at that time, asked us, look, I want to do XYZ, can you give me this kind of a territory? We worked out, it's always been collaborative. And Lagos is a success story within the limited success that we all have. And it's a model that we can ramp up with. There is still, I think Lagos, by the last study they did, the demand for Lagos alone today is over 4,000 megawatts. That's, in fact, Eco alone, the territory. So there's so much room for everybody. What we just need is to have that environment that will attract the investment. If investors are coming in, and investments are huge, they're in dollars today, look at what your macroeconomics are suggesting, they will take a very, 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 very hard look. Because if things go the way we expect them to go, you expect that it is the tariffs from which you can recover the investment. And today, Nigeria is talking about 4,000 megawatts. The aggregate doesn't even work for an investor. Because for an investor to make anything meaningful, he will invest as though he were investing for 20,000 megawatts. He's not going to do for 4,000 megawatts. And how is he going to get 4,000 megawatts of revenue to compensate for that? Who bears the difference? Those are the things plaguing the sector. So if we say, okay, disaggregate, let us go regional, let us go states, good. Yeah, we'll start talking about electricity markets, not market anymore. I agree. But we also have to be our brother's keeper. Electricity is a very emotional subject. It's understandable. And that's because it directly impacts on our happiness. You think about how many times light goes off and the mood changes. Everybody's sad. But once it comes out, like a football goal has been scored, yay, and all that. So if one region is growing rapidly and another is left behind, you may create a disequilibrium in the system. So whatever we do, we must learn to hand carry each other, so that development even if it's not uniform, it's at least proportional. This is what I think the good we should be looking at in what this opportunity is. But please, those of you close to state governments, please tell them to measure their strengths before they create black holes from which they can never get out. It's so easy to talk because they will have to put the initial money down. And if the investors are expecting don't bring their money, they have to put more money to recover the first money. And after you know it, they won't be able to pay salaries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Itomi. I think you did say that you're a student of history. 46 years of solid experience in the legal sector, and you took us through the timeline, from the banking consolidation or banking reform, telecoms reform, right up to electricity reform. Put things in the right context. And you're saying, look, Nigerians, we have to channel the genius within us. Everything we're looking for is here. We don't need to be going out and trying to look for it. But it requires deliberate action. It requires planning. And you've given examples of what has been achieved in Lagos. What Eko, Disco, and Ikeja have managed to achieve. Within all those constraints. It means that there's always room for us to innovate, and that's actually what it's about. To release the entrepreneurial spirit and allow capital to flow. And for me, I think one thing that we're going to see in this market is also innovation around the financing. Because going around and chasing hard currency financing has not worked for us. To be able to say, oh, I'm going to lend to a business that collects Naira over 25 years, and you're lending in dollars, and you're collecting your revenues in Naira. It's not going to work. That business model is not sustainable. And what we've done at the bank in supporting what is now the largest institutional investor in the power sector in Naira, the Nigeria Infrastructure Debt Fund. That's a long-term sustainable model because, there's pension fund money here, there's institutional money that is not finding its way because we haven't created the products to provide the outlet for that money to go into infrastructure. And that's my own emphasis. When people come to me and say they want to borrow dollars over 25 years, in other countries, I will do it. But in Nigeria, I say, look, don't do that. Let's do what we see in South Africa. You go and borrow rand to do projects there. And on the day you want to buy your equipment, you will convert your rand to dollars, buy the equipment, but you're not exposing yourself to 25 years to hard currency. Even the rand is very volatile against the dollar. You go to India, you finance in rupees. You don't hear about Americans going to borrow Japanese yen to finance their infrastructure. They finance in dollars. They're lucky. They have the world's reserve currency, and they can print dollars as much as they want. They don't get penalized. If we print dollars, we get whipped because it's not the world's reserve currency. But that's a different matter. So what I'm saying is that this whole issue about innovation, we're going to see innovation in financing, and we're already seeing that. So I very much agree, with Mr. Itomi's submission that really, we have to release and challenge the genius within us. And one thing I should also say that I find very encouraging in Nigeria, whenever I have these discussions in other parts of Africa, you see that most of the people in the audience are not the natives. It's all full of international investors coming. Here, the room is full of Nigerians. We're having a discussion about how we're going to improve our country with our resources. It's difficult, it's not easy, but I think it's also a strength in a way, because you don't control, foreign capital, they're like fair weather friends. When things are good, you see them, they'll be coming in. The minute, the first sign of trouble, they'll be the first to exit. And I always say, you know, for us as Africans, we have nowhere else to go. Some of us try and go to Europe by boat or whatever, but most of us will be here. So we have to solve the problems. Anyway, so leading me to the next point, I want to ask, you know, Barrister Wolemi about this whole construct that we've now created, you know, because the lawyers, whether we like them or not, will have a say in how this thing works. Now, are we creating problem for ourselves by having, you know, the kind of regulation? Is there going to be a conflict between national legislation and state legislation? So once the states start to although you may mean well, but once the states start to introduce their own legislation, are we creating the ripe environment, a field day for conflict? And how is that going to affect us? And there's one interesting issue also about the way this act may evolve. You know, some distribution companies they operate across multiple states. So can you have a single entity that is being regulated by two different regulators? You know, I'm Abuja Disco, I have my coverage, Abuja, Niger State, you know, and there's a third one, you know. So when I'm in this state, I have to answer to this regulator. When I go to this state, I have to answer to this regulator. And then the act says as soon as a state regulator is created, then I have to create a subsidiary in that state. Am I balkanizing the business of my distribution company? And in reality, how sustainable is that? You know, do I have to separate my accounts? Do I have to separate my obligations to my lenders? Do I have to divide my assets? You know, I mean, Wolemi is a very comfortable man already. But I mean, are we going to create, you know, a super class of very rich lawyers who are living off the Electricity Act? You know, so look, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think I would like to start by adding my voice to Uncle George's voice in congratulating all of us. We've been at this for 10 years. I remember where we all started from, trying to read up quickly about the sector, trying to pick things we can pick. Today, most of us can say, okay, yeah, we now have a very good handle of the sector. So Wale, I think your question I'll put into two separate buckets. So there's the conflict issue, then there's the straddling disco issue. So starting with the conflict issue, in any environment where you have a dual regulatory regime, right? So where you have the federal legislature exercising legislative competence on an issue that the state legislature also can exercise legislative competence, there is bound to be conflict, right? And in trying to resolve that conflict, there is the principle of, okay, covering the field, just to make sure that, okay, at least one of the entities will have the final say. And the Constitution is very clear in terms of how it's supposed to work. So if you look at Section 4.5, it says if a State House of Assembly makes a law on an issue that the National Assembly has validly made a law on, then the law made by the State House of Assembly will be void to the extent of its inconsistency with the federal law. So that's the framework for sort of resolving the conflict. So when paragraph 14B of part 2 of second schedule of the Constitution 1999 was amended to make it clear that distribution will be a state-regulated activity, there were concerns because the extant law that was regulating the sector then, EPSRA, did not envisage a dual regulatory regime. So it was very clear that EPSRA was not going to work in the context of the constitutional amendment. It was just going to be chaos, right? Now, if you look at the Electricity Act, it has tried to sort of draw bright red lines as to who is supposed to do what. So if you start with Section 2.2, it says, it states that nothing in the Electricity Act will make invalid any law made by a state government in connection with generation, transmission, distribution of electricity within that state. So from that point of view, it's very clear that beyond that the Electricity Act, and I think it was the former commissioner that also made that point that, look, the Electricity Act tried to make plain what the Constitution says. And if you even go further down the Electricity Act, there are other provisions that also make it clear. If you look at 63.2 says a state is allowed to license generation, distribution, transmission, IDN, ITN within its state, right? Go further down, you go to section 232, which empowers states to set up state regulators and also create electricity market within their states. Come down to 233, that says that it provides for what I call regulatory deference or cooperation, such that once a state sets up, then NEC is obliged to hand over. So pretty that much is clear. Now, there are one or two areas where you have wrinkles, right? And maybe the next iteration of the law, that wrinkle will be resolved. And that wrinkle is in relation to mini-grids, IDN and ITN. Because 63.7, I believe, says that it's a proviso, 63.7b, says that if a mini-grid, IDN, ITN, relies on any part of the grid for its operations, it seems to suggest that that is reserved for NEC.
Okay.
When distribution, when the Constitution is very clear as to who should be in charge of distribution, how that stray reference got into the Act, I don't know, maybe there's some mystery to it or just improper cleaning up of the document. So that is very interesting because it doesn't say if distribution relies on grid, NEC will regulate, because of course distribution will rely on grid because the power is coming centrally, coming from somewhere. But it says if ITN relies on grid, then NEC cannot, then states regulator cannot regulate, it has to be NEC.
Okay.
So that is a wrinkle that I'm sure in the fullness of time it will be resolved.
Okay.
Now to your other question as to straddling discourse. I think, and maybe it was because Commissioner was very active when the law was being drafted, it will appear that that old regime was designed just for Lagos. It will appear that the regime was designed for Lagos.
Right.
Because it says once a state licenses, then NEC exits, the state regulator takes over. It makes sense in the context of Lagos, where the two discos in Lagos have just one regulator. They are not straddling, right? But every other disco outside Lagos straddles. Straddles. So you take Abuja, for example. Abuja straddles Nasarawa, straddles Niger, right? So, and I think you've put your finger on one of the issues. If I'm a straddling disco, and one of the states that I straddle sets up a state regulator, you know, Dr. Amadi referenced Benin trying to do something. Benin disco straddles like 5 states. So Edo does something, Ekiti doesn't do the same, or Delta doesn't do the same. Then it means that you have to carve out that operations, right? And in carving out, anybody that does M&A will know that the carving out process cannot fit into the timeline that has been provided. And I think we also lost a significant opportunity in designing that scheme to exclude the carving out from some heads of costs. Because you have to move assets. Because the law says you create a subsidiary. So when you create a subsidiary, so it's a spin-off in investment banking terms. It's a spin-off. So when you spin off, you have to move assets, you have to move all the buildings, you have to move all the transformers, and there is significant cost. Even stamp duties alone can take 2.5 or 2%, right? And in putting the act together, if some of these things had been contemplated, they could have used the law to say this transfer will be cost-free, and this amends the provisions of maybe the Stamp Duties Act or the Finance Act that says when you do this type of transaction, you'll be liable to costs. So I'll pause there. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Barrister Walemi. You see, I was right. There's many opportunities for lawyers to make money. So, so the issue of carving out, that's very rich in all kinds of problems. You know, stamp duty issues, the cost, how registering title. How is that going to happen? I have title, and then I have to register it in another state. I mean, this needs to be looked at. And then this issue of mini grids. We have a mini grid boom in this country. So mini grids, operating within distribution areas, what's going to happen? So NERC is going to continue to regulate that. And what does the state do? You called it regulatory, is it subservience, or I can't remember the term, but deference, yes, regulatory deference, which is good in the clarity that it provides to say, look, once the state has made the law, then the state takes over. Whereas the Constitution itself operates the other way to say that it's in national legislation that will take precedence. But when the constitutional amendment was made and it gave this freedom for states to start to legislate on electricity, then it's important to have that clarity. Otherwise, you would have created further grounds for confusion. I mean, Rome was not built in a day, and we're going to have to evolve. But it's, maybe I should have trained as a lawyer. There's always room. There's always room, to find something. But you have to eat. In fact, the drafters were lawyers. So look, if we make this thing too clear, then what? There's nothing left. So let's leave this ambiguity there. The boys, look after the boys. Anyway, so fantastic. I think this is very helpful. But moving forward, it's also important for us to learn from international experience, because everything we're trying to do here has been done before. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're not the first country that is trying to electrify. And the models that we have in Nigeria also exist to some extent in certain places. So we've borrowed from some of the stuff from the Indian experience, even the US experience, and also in Africa we have countries that are also reforming, opening up the sector, unbundling. We all know what is going on in South Africa right now. There's a huge power emergency. So we thought, let's have some input, from, what's happening across the continent. And there's no better person with the overview of what's happening across the continent than Professor Peter Teswige, who sits in the University of Cape Town. And by the way, University of Cape Town has an excellent program for power sector reform, regulation. They have what's called the Power Futures Lab, and many African professionals are being trained there. So I hope Professor Peter is on the line. We asked him to join us from. Peter, hi, how are you? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Excellent. I hope you've been following the discussion that we've been having here. Fantastic.
Yes, I did.
So, in fact, we should have a discussion. Maybe we should talk about developing a specific course for Nigeria. We take them to Cape Town and let them understand, the landscape of what's been going on, because we can all pick from what's happened in different places. And, looking at South Africa, when I think about it, Soweto University municipality, they're probably the biggest debtor to ESCOM. They don't pay their bills, right? So, and when we talk, ESCOM at one time was a leader across Africa in terms of setting the bar on how a utility should be run, but for all kinds of reasons, we've had issues. We know ESCOM has aging plants, but the process has started. The government is putting in place measures to try to address them. So the problems are not unique to Nigeria. It's just the nature of the beast. But please, let me bring you in, Peter. Just give us your sense. I'll just let you react to what you've heard, because I'm sure with your view across Africa, there are many lessons, and maybe you can offer us some advice from where you sit. Over to you.
Thank you, Wally, and good morning, everyone. I've been listening in from the various speakers, and there are kind of mixed messages that come out, primarily in how this electricity amendment started and the drivers, which my colleague hinted on earlier about the irrational investment decisions driven by policymakers and politicians preferring to have certain assets in one state over the others simply because they have a substantial level of influence and they can move and motivate for certain investments to be localized in one state. I think that's an inefficient way of developing energy infrastructure projects. And I realized that the intent was to have a more balanced approach where state assets can be evenly spread through the country and different states. It is the mechanism of how that is to be done that needs review or revision. Simply because what I see is that, and it's common across African countries, is that if you do not have a well-designed integrated resource plan, and that this plan is developed by a competent team of respectable engineers, economists, lawyers, and that kind of court team, that it has credibility not only at state level but at federal level, so that it is appreciated by the governors, the members of the federal government, ministers, and the presidency, then you're likely to have the more powerful politicians driving resource allocation rather than relying on techno-economic rationale. I would say that having understood that context, I think it's important to link it to the reform options that Nigeria has adopted. First, I think that Nigeria must commend it for having gone farthest. It was one of the countries that have gone farthest in terms of adopting several reforms, in terms of unbundling, regulation, private sector participation, and of course now towards competition. And whereas these have been put in place, it is the kind of combinations that the country chooses to adopt that will make sense in terms of impact and delivering certain outcomes for the consumers. Because certain reform steps by themselves, when implemented individually or singly, they will not deliver the kind of performance that the consumers desire. So they must be sequenced and implemented in combination to deliver certain impacts. And for example, when you look at the regulation, it's a bit concerning for me that Nigeria, from the ERI rankings by the FDB, when you look at the reports that have consistently been produced, you notice that the regulator has done so much in such a short time since the reforms took place, but there are still significant areas for improvement that relate to governance. And I think the last report ranking of governance scored Nigeria around number 21. On the substance, we were number 30 or thereabouts, which was in a critical red. And on the impact, you're performing relatively better in number 9. But if with the new Electricity Act and amendments, if you were to create regulatory entities in each state in Nigeria, I think leaves questions of whether each state will have the capacity to develop the kind of complexity and readiness to have separate regulators looking at all these governance aspects, and also take into consideration the underlying political conflicts of interest that will be embedded and whether they will achieve the same intent. I understand the need to have infrastructure spread across, but the enabling environment, the regulations, the ease of actually getting these implemented in practice is going to be a challenge that needs to be properly analyzed. I don't know whether there is still a chance to have revisions to that Electricity Act or whether we must move ahead with it. I think the idea is, since it's newly passed, we have to proceed with it and make some changes. But critically linked to regulation is the aspect of the financial viability of your utilities. And this is a big driver on how the kind of investments that you want to bring in, because I must say that financial viability of your discos and even generation companies must be so robust that they can incentivize or attract private investments only if they have credible balance sheets that can be leveraged to attract private sector funding, because to the private sector, capital only follows returns, and only returns exist if you create the necessary de-risking tools that will persuade the investors to commit their capital, whether debt or equity, into that state. And this fits into the overall country risk of Nigeria as a whole, but now you're making it even more complex that any investor will now have to look at the macroeconomic environment of each state to make a decision on the level of premiums they have to factor into the kind of investment decision they have to make. They have to also look at the kind of corporate or company risks for each of these states or discos in each of these states. They will look at the regulatory risk at state level and price it accordingly. They will look at the market risks as filters down or cascades down to each state. So if you're in Calabar, if you're in Kano, if you are in Ogun, then all these will be priced according to the market environments in each of these states. And then one will come out with a balance, a pricing and a premium that will ultimately go to the tariff. So I foresee a scenario where your retail tariffs or even investment costs, the weighted average cost of capital is going to be steeply expensive if you're going to develop infrastructure solely relying on private capital. So there's need to rethink of alternative funding mechanisms that you need for investments in generation, transmission, and distribution, and have, the other aspect I wanted to look at is you may need to now have to think of state guarantees, state level guarantees than federal level kind of guarantees and letters of credit that will be used to backstop or to back these investment needs in infrastructure. All these are going to create a certain level of complexity unlike before that we have not seen before. In terms of privatization, I know there is good news and the bad side of privatization in the sense that each of these forms of private sector participation, of course, has certain requirements for it to be considered either successful or not. But to my understanding is you need to have a commercial culture and a commercial orientation and management capability that you have to attract this kind of private sector participation continuously going forward in the next 20, 30 years. And of course, private sector participation will help to cut all these political vested interests and ensure that your commercialization is achieved in terms of near cost reflective or cost reflective tariffs that you can source financing on debt, open market debt terms, and that you can recruit staff without any political influence, that you can run competitive tenders in an open and transparent manner, and the culture and attitude of the staff that you have within your utilities, whether transmission, distribution, or retail, or even generation, must match the kind of commercial orientation if you are going to have financially viable utilities. I've not heard of any financially viable state disco in Nigeria, but if there is, please, I beg to be corrected here. So it's going to be a whole, and this is where the rubber hits the tar when actually the actual running of the utilities starts, because having a commercial-oriented culture within the utilities that can actually sustainably and considerably continue properly managing these utilities and a financial footing and a sound financial footing is important. And all these will need to be blended with more transparent mechanisms around governance, accountability, transparency, and scrutiny, where the board members of utilities or these now unbundled entities have to be subjected to annual general meetings in case some of them are mixed capital enterprises with a mix of private and public resources funding, or if they are purely privately privatized, they need to have kind of annual general meetings where accountability platforms are shared with the consumers to make contributions in house they are governed and managed. Of course, this also will bring in the aspects of ESG. These are environmental, social, and governance controls that need to be put in place first, that need to be reflected in the law, but also in practice in how they're implemented within the normal operations of the utilities. I noticed that there is still a gap around the timely initiation of competitive tendering to build capacity, especially in generation and transmission. Looking at there is the theoretically the installed capacity of generation and what you actually effectively can serve on your peak demand, and this brings me to the issue of the similarities that you have and what Latin America had in the early 90s, 2000s, because they equally set out to build an open wholesale market, but then they forgot to look. They thought that having wholesale retail markets would be enough to send the right proper signals, price signals to attract in investments, which was not the case. And instead, they realized that they needed to focus more on improving the technical and financial performance of their distribution and transmission companies. And so they had to undergo another phase of reforms, primarily changing the law to address performance issues. I think this is a step that you need to look at and reprioritize and ensure that performance of the utilities is important, but also that you can create an enabling planning, well-structured planning function within the industry that can be used to initiate timely and necessary investments into the sector. There is an issue around the discourse straddling or overlapping the boundaries that are kind of political separators between one state and the other. A key consideration here is that whereas this has been primarily defined in legalese, the legal terms, in the power sector kind of regulation and applicable economic and financial treatment of assets and engineering, that energy flows between one state to the other and assets can actually straddle two boundaries, it is important that the accounting treatment and economic treatment and financial implications of these are properly taken into consideration, and how these are actually registered on the asset base and valued. If you have assets straddling a substation that serves two industries, one in Cross River and another in the next state, what happens? Where does that asset lie? And where does the compensation go to during peak time and off-peak times? So these considerations are going to create more complexity. There will be issues around wheeling frameworks that need to be revised, around necessary additional infrastructure that needs to be put in place in terms of boundary emitters to measure what energy flows are going to which side. And then I've missed something that is important. We are seeing a new wave of reforms, the third wave of reforms, which is these disruptive technologies that are prompting a new wave of reforms across the world. And these are happening profoundly and rapidly. This innovation in renewables and services that are shifting and underpinning relative prices and market shares of and location of energy assets in terms of mini grids, for example, would be a case here, but you could have other alternative sources of energy like gas. You could have battery storage, you could have rooftop solar systems, and all these that require that are becoming increasingly important in the commercial and industrial segment, that are requiring digitalization investments, creating more consumers, what we're calling prosumers, people who previously producing only also to consume electricity. And then the critical mass of ICT infrastructure that will be needed. You have smart grids that will be needed as well. And so this kind of infrastructure is going to be more complex and more decentralized in ways and mechanisms that we have not seen before. I'm not sure whether the law has a robust framework or provision that caters for these innovations and how they will need to be regulated, and more complexly in the wholesale kind of trading environment that can either accelerate and enable for innovation that we talked about, what he talked about, innovation in how we finance investments and how we can use national currency to make commitments in farm energy assets investments. These issues that need to be looked at in totality. I would say, like to draw on the example of South Africa that has is currently also undergoing through a series of reforms and more complex discussions going on around unbundling. Yes, whereas there is a realization that it has taken long for ESCOM to be unbundled, there has been a fast movement that's been made to actually separate the transmission system operator and market operator and create a wholesale retail market, and have the private sector as well as the increasingly the commercial and industrial loads participate in this new market. It is now the kind of rules that you need to set in place that will lead the transition from a single buyer model to a wholesale retail market that is increasingly contested because the private sector in all forms, whether you're private participants with the rooftop solar system and you need to feed power back to the grid, need to understand the rules to follow.
Sorry, Peter, I'm sorry to interrupt. We're running out of time, so I'll need you to wrap up shortly, if you don't mind.
Thank you. I think the message I have here is that as Nigeria goes through this kind of series of reforms, it's important to look at the kind of whether the Set Energy Act will translate into impactful tools and frameworks that can be used to change the sector to a financially viable one. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Peter Tswige from University of Cape Town. I can see that you're also going to be very busy in Nigeria offering your consultancy services because you've raised some very important points that we need to be aware of, and you know, issues around governance, very important issues around the new technologies that are emerging and how those are going to be regulated and the capacity required to do that, and a very important point around the sustainability of utilities, you know, because this energy, this power will be bought by an entity, and that's what creates the bankability. So it's very important that our utilities are sustainable, and it's very important that they're financially viable. And the issue around, you know, the different tariffs that may emerge, or the cost of production in different regulatory environments, how that is going to be provided for. I know the Act actually talks about, you know, the creation, or, well, it's of a consumer subsidy fund I think there was a provision for that before. Now that needs to be implemented. How is that fund going to operate? How are those poorer consumers going to be defined and identified? And how will the subsidy operate? So there's a lot of food for thought there, and so thank you very much for offering those pearls of wisdom from your own experience from looking across the sector, all over Africa. Now, before we round up, I think we need to give the audience the opportunity to ask questions. A lot has been discussed. Now we have the new act. We're all going to have to implement it together. Nothing is perfect, but I think we can agree that it's opened up some new opportunities and provided clarity around what states can do and what they cannot do. But I like the point that Wolemi raised, that maybe the Lagos State agenda kind of dominated the way that the legislation was framed, because the drafters may not have thought so deeply about discourse that are straddling different states and what that means. So let's open the floor for questions. Maybe we'll take about 3 or 4 questions and then come back to the panel. How long do we have, Dr. Joy? Roughly? About 10 minutes, okay. So let's, we have a gentleman in the corner, number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4 right at the back. Oh, I'm so, my God, Dion, sorry, you were in my blind spot. So let us give you number 5. Yeah. So please just go straight to the questions. No speeches, just go straight. We don't have much time. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Lanre Lati. My first question goes to Mr. Wolemi. Section 3 of the Electricity Act talks about competitive national electricity market. So with transition to the wholesale market. So, and the regulator presently is looking at it and has mandated the 3 discos to engage in bilateral contracts. So how is that going to pan out? Then another question is, there always a challenge in market transition, and the challenge is about legacy contracts. So we have PPAs that run up to 20 years. So we have discos that have engaged in performance improvement plans with about 5 years trajectory. So how is that going to work out? Then the section 4 of the Act says independent system operator withdraw responsibility of market and system operation. So what jurisdiction is that ISO going to preside over? So that's my question.
Okay, thank you very much. Number 2, who was number 2? Okay.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the panelists for the interaction. My name is Peter Ian from Akwa Ibom State, representing Imperial Global Services Limited. My question has to be very practical, because from day one, I've started listening to literatures and ideas. And I want to ask this question straight to the former Commissioner for Power in Lagos State. Sir, I want to ask, is there any way that NESI, as a stakeholder, can actually help the electricity markets for the government to eradicate the government, the political interests, the political influence, and also the interests, because these 2 areas are the main bottleneck that actually have constraints for implementation of all the literatures and ideas that we have shared from day 1 to day 3. Then secondly, I want to appeal again that I feel this stakeholders roundtable should spread across the states, because other states, like my states, I so much thank God that the chairman of Ibom Power is here and his team. He will deliver this message to the state governor. We will appreciate for the states to have you in, because in Akwa Ibom states, there are a lot of markets in the power sector, because we, the private entity, we have been exposed to investors who are willing to come to invest. But the bottleneck is, is there any way that NESI can make up the environment for the investors to have a free level entry, for them to have comfort to come to invest? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Number 3, please. Yes.
Good morning. My name is Ahmad Umar Sanusi. My major question is about corporate governance code. And I think the former commissioner, anyway, so we should refer to him as former commissioner anymore after 10 years. I just want his insight into the corporate governance code, which is still a draft. And we've seen with our experience, we've seen huge information asymmetry even within the discourse space between board, management, and the operatives. I don't see us still discussing corporate governance. So please, I want a response from him. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. And then there's number 4 at the back there.
Good morning and thank you. My name is Edo Keke. I work with Azura. Thank you very much for this very topic. I know recently when I said that this Electricity Act is one of the worst laws we've passed in Nigeria, some of my colleagues here were like raising arms. I give kudos to when I see Mr. Dushot earlier, because he was one of those instrumental in passing the law. But I give kudos to him because he was Lagos Commissioner for Energy. And I think that the law only benefits Lagos State and no other state in Nigeria. Unfortunately, it's going to drag us back. I hear people say that this law will make electricity being distributed, but I keep wondering, for the past 50 years, we've had distributed electricity in Nigeria, because everybody here is a generator, transmitter, and distributor in his own right. So what else are we going to achieve when we are trying now to use the law to make it official that you cannot build a large-scale IPP again? We are talking of the tariff we have with the discourse, but how do we imagine when they start creating subsidiaries and offices, the cost implication of it to make even tariff on the grid not being, sustainable at all? And the last one, which I don't know if Awolemi can opine on, is, can we ever build a large-scale IPP again? Simply because, except Lagos that can take maybe 500 megawatts, no other state in Nigeria can take 500 megawatts. And that means something like Azura can never happen, because under project finance, because no state can take 500 megawatts, if you start looking at laws, whether passed or not passed by each state, that means that no lender will ever sign off for you to build a power plant and transmit from one state to the other. Lastly, for those that don't know, I was speaking to one of the governorship aspirants in one of the states recently, and because when we pass a law, we don't even think of the implication, and he's telling me that, look, that there is a lot of gas in his state, that his plan is to attract generators to his state and tax them in such a way that they sell power to other states who will pay, while electricity will be free in his state. That's the kind of thinking we're already thinking. So again, while we all thank the federal government for negotiating the VAT bill by making sure that states don't start collecting VAT, which will have rendered the country unoperable, we've now gone into electricity and passed exactly the same law, which means that no big project will ever happen in this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eddie. So we have number 5 there. Thank you.
Eddie, don't worry, I'm not going to respond because I know that your first conversation was also had it. But let me quickly clarify a misconception. The Electricity Act is not a mistake. I have the Honorable Commissioner of Rivers State Energy sitting with me. It's not a mistake, and the law wasn't made for Lagos State alone. Lagos State contributed, so also other states contributed. We are already seeing the benefits as we push. But the concerns in this room are valid around state electricity markets, how it's implemented. From a capacity perspective, you can even see that there's a gap, right? Which is why the Nigerian Governors Forum, they recognize some of these risk challenges, and they put together a program which they called Nigerian the Sub-National Electricity Market Support Program, which is like a holistic framework to drive the development of subnational electricity markets. And a lot of the concerns here are being looked at to see how this can be addressed, right? A lot of the resources in this room surely will be called upon to address some of these things, but the concerns are valid and they will be addressed. The last point I'd like to make is that state electricity markets is an extension of the national grid. Let's not make any mistake. Distribution is now under the control of states. It was the National Assembly that actually never had the rights to make laws for distribution. They just usurped that law. So let's look at it that state electricity markets are an extension of the national grid because now the retail side of the market will be controlled by states while the national grid controls the wholesale market. What that then means is the interconnection agreements between state licensees and national licensees should be smooth. So generators like Azura can be rest assured that they can sell their power down to my local government in Edo State, that we don't even have power. I can't put a gas plant in my local government, it's too expensive, even the capex cost. So my closest way of getting power is to look at the nearest TCN infrastructure there and connect to it and maybe buy power from Azura. That is in Edo State, right? So I don't think we should look at it from a doomsday perspective. Let's just see how we can implement it and we'll make progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Odion. Now, okay, so let's come back to the panel. I think the question one was very clear to Walemi. Over to you. Section 3.
Okay, so thanks again for the question. So I think the questions are in like 2-3 buckets. I'll briefly just touch on them, then we can catch up after the panel session. Now, in relation to declaration of market competitiveness or as to whether the market is ready for the next phase, I think that's a regulatory issue. It's not a legal issue. And there are preconditions to be met before NEC can declare that the market is ready to move into the next phase. But if you look at the reports, the 2020 report was issued just last month on the 3rd of October, right? That analyzed some... No, the 2022 report was issued on the 3rd of October 2023. The one they issued last month. Yeah. So the one they issued last month was for 2022. And in that paper, as you rightly noted, they identified the 3 discos that are doing relative. I think Benin, Ikeja, and exactly. So whether the market is ready or not is a regulatory issue. That's the first thing. Then the second thing, which I find interesting looking at that report, is that perhaps because the report was dated, it's supposed to be a 2022 report, there's a strange reference to EBSRA. It was issued, if you read that report, it was issued post-1 to EBSRA. You know, not minding the fact that EBSRA no longer exists. Yeah, so it was issued post-1 to EBSRA, though they just issued it a few weeks ago. Then the third point is, even in relation to the preconditions, if you look at the Electricity Act and the EBSRA, right, the conditions are different. That's number one. Number two, even how to declare has changed, because historically, under EBSRA, it was the minister that would declare. But now, it's the commission in consultation with the minister. So that's what I'll say about that. Then,
we have to limit responses to 1 minute, please.
okay, so I'll just respond to the transitioning points. I take your point on transitioning. I'm aware that NEC is thinking about it, more so that the NBED sunset date is imminent. The legal structure of how that will be done remains to be seen. Is it just going to be innovation simpliciter? Is it going to be something more interesting? I don't know. I agree with you. It's going to require a lot of thinking through. Yeah. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Very much. Former Commissioner Larry, please, over to you, number 2.
Thank you. There are two questions and comments that I think I should respond to. The first one was to do with, I'm not sure if I got the question, but what you said was that the biggest problem we have in the electricity supply industry today is political interference, and how are we going to stop that from happening? And level the playing field, if you will. Now, there are two ways of looking at it. Number one is that the states are in competition for attracting investments. And any state that makes itself uninvestor friendly will simply not get any investments. I think that's the short answer to your question. We didn't go into the reform of the electricity sector with the aim of just reforming it. We went to it with the aim of attracting investment and ensuring universal access to electricity. And everything we've done so far, from the integrated resource plan, which was the first, by some national fact, the first that was done in the country, right, to the off-grid strategy and plan, to all of the other publications that we've put together, including the draft electricity bill for Lagos State, is to ensure that we're able to attract investment. And the question was, why would anybody want to come and invest in a place that already has a market? All the interest that we get from Lagos is due to the fact that there's a preponderance of diesel generating sets in Lagos, and with all the attendant climate effects. At the last count, we have about 23 gigawatts of installed capacity of diesel in Lagos. That's generators that people paid money for. The grid supplies 1,200 megawatts to Lagos in comparison. So if we look at the amount of energy that's generated in Lagos, about 80% comes from own generation. So that speaks to the size of the market, and that's very expensive power. If we can find a way to consolidate all of that into the grid and bring the prices down, we think the demand in Lagos will skyrocket. But that's what we think. It's left for it to be borne out. So the question about the Electricity Act being from a state point of view, no, it wasn't. The Electricity Reform Act was being reviewed at the time that we came in and at the time that I got involved. It wasn't a Lagos State matter. The presentation made to the Senate was made by the Nigerian Governors Forum, not by Lagos State. Lagos State was involved for its own selfish interests. When I say selfish interest, i.e. we want universal access to electricity in Lagos, and that's why we got involved. And to the question of, sometimes when we make comments and we ask questions, we don't look at it from a global point of view. I'm looking at Lagosians and saying, what do Lagosians want? I'm not looking at a generating company. Azura signed a contract. It was a beautiful contract, very well drafted. It showed us how contracts can be signed and how we can attract investors, but didn't look at the larger market. Did we need to sign Azura? In my opinion, no. We didn't need Azura at the time we signed it, but we signed it anyway, and Azura gets paid on a monthly basis, as it should. The other power plants don't. Do we need a large power plant in Nigerian market today? Can the distribution companies distribute the power? Those are the questions that we must ask ourselves, and that's what an integrated resource plan does. So to say the Electricity Act ensures that we can no longer build large-scale power plants is patently wrong. The intention is for us to develop the market in the states such that there's an interest in investment, and when that investment happens, there's going to be a need for more power needs. When we did a review of the past power requirements in Lagos, and we said today we can distribute 4,000 megawatts if we had the infrastructure, because that's what the demand is. We believe that that's going to grow to 12,000 megawatts over the next 20 years, and that, in our opinion, is a conservative estimate. Every single state can do a projection of what their needs are. And by the way, when the market is formed the way we expect it to be formed, there will be no PPAs. Because then the market itself will demonstrate that it can pay and has been paying over time for the electricity that it consumes. That's what we should be looking at. It's a place that works for all of us, not that works for one power station. So please, let's look at it from a broader point of view and not start saying this act does not favor me doubling my plant capacity without providing the commensurate benefits to the market.
We're going to have to wrap up. Thank you so much, Honorable former Commissioner Larry. I'm told we have to wrap up, but there's still one or two questions not answered, but we've really run out of time. The issue about governance, maybe we'll have to take that bilaterally. The issue of about whether we can continue to do big projects, I think so, and I agree with what Larry said. We have to interconnect the markets. We also interconnect regionally. In Europe, they're not signing PPAs for 25 years. They're selling into a power pool, and that's where we need to go. Yeah, we're not there yet. We have to build the infrastructure. So actually, and it was just a comment from Odeon. I think it's point taken. Good to see the Governors Forum playing such an active role. Thank you so much to all our panelists. I think the discussion has been very illuminating. Thank you very much, and I'm sure we will continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think what we will do, no, it's okay. What we will do, because we want to really manage time. Dr. Sam, please. Dr. Sam. Okay, I'm pleading on Dr. Sam. Okay. Sir, the lady in red is pleading. All right, thank you. While that is ongoing, our next session is set. The panelists are ready. The moderator is here. But we're going to go for a tea break. And our panelists, including the moderators, we have a session made for your tea break side by my right when you go there outside. Then every other person, we're going straight again. Please, we'll be back in the next 15 minutes. I plead with you all so that we'll be able to knock off the things without getting to leave any question unanswered. We have only 15 minutes